Hello, everyone, and welcome to the White House. The President just finished the 2013 State of the Union Address, and many of you watched the enhanced version at whitehouse.gov/SOTU, and some of you are actually joining us right now. All of you are welcome to this great event we're going to have for the next little while. The goal of this is to go over what the President talked about and answer your questions and your concerns about what you heard and get your feedback. There's a bunch of ways to do that, and I'm going to describe them off the top and throw a couple reminders out during the program. Then I'll introduce everyone to my left, and we'll get started. So first of all, the URL to remember for all of this is whitehouse.gov/SOTU. Really, whitehouse.gov will get you wherever you need to go. That's going to have video of tonight's speech in case you tuned in late or you want to go back and see something. It's going to have all the charts and graphics and the different things that we put together to supplement what the President had to say. It'll have the transcript of the speech. And much more. It'll also have a schedule of events that we have coming up this week, including a Google Hangout with President Obama on Thursday. Second thing that's there that we're really excited about is the citizen response tool. That's going to be published momentarily, and you'll be able to go through the speech line by line, pick a sentence that spoke to you and tell the President why, and then share a link to that specific line on your social networks. We're really excited to see what you have to say about that, and we're going to be putting together a report for senior White House staff and the President to review. So please check that out. It's called Citizen Response. And then finally, we have this event. You can participate online on Twitter, Facebook, Google+, a whole host of social networks. We'll be keeping our eyes on all of our presences there. Use the hashtag WHChat, which is the one we'll be looking at for questions, and we'll be pulling those in throughout the event. But before I start taking questions, let me explain who these folks here are to the left, and then we'll introduce the audience as well. So let's start on the end with Roberto Rodriguez. Why don't you give a little bit about your background here at the White House and the areas that you focus on?
Sure, Macon. Hi, everyone. My name is Roberto Rodriguez. I'm the Special Assistant to the President for Education. Here at the Domestic Policy Council, we focus on providing every student a great education from cradle all the way through career.
Great. Thank you. Our next panelist is Heather Zekel. Heather?
Thanks. My name is Heather Zekel, Deputy Assistant to the President for Energy and Climate Policy. I handle coordination of the President's broader all-of-the-above energy strategy and focus on finding new ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Great. And then our next guest, Felicia?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Felicia Escobar. I am the Senior Policy Director for Immigration here at the Domestic Policy Council, and I'm working with a team of people at the White House and across the administration on the President's agenda to fix our broken immigration system.
Okay. Brian?
Hi, I'm Brian Deese. I'm the Deputy Director of the National Economic Council, and I do economic policy.
How many of these do you think you've done before?
This is number 5.
Number 5. Okay. All right. Sarah?
I can't claim number 5 of these, but I am Sarah Bianchi. I'm a Deputy Assistant to the President and coordinate policy for the Vice President, and most specifically and most recently, that means coordinating our response to gun violence.
Great. And finally, Josh?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Josh Earnest. I'm the Principal Deputy Press Secretary at the White House, and I mostly answer questions about what all these people are doing up here.
So Josh is also really good at sort of giving an overview, and I've asked him just to do a quick recap on everything that you saw. I know all of you watched the whole thing, but for those of you that are just tuning in, if you could go through and just hit the highlights, and then we'll dive right into our first question.
I'll do that, Macon. Thank you. The President's goal tonight was to lay out his plan to create jobs and strengthen the middle class in America. This is something the President's been focused on since he entered public life. The President has long believed that our economy and our country is not strong unless we have a strong and growing and thriving middle class. The President posed 3 specific questions that the country needed to answer to accomplish this goal of having a strong and thriving middle class. The first, how do we attract jobs, good paying jobs to America? What do we do to make sure that American workers have the skills they need to compete for and fill those jobs? And finally, how can we make sure that hard work actually leads to economic opportunity? The President laid out some specific ideas in the areas of manufacturing policy, in the area of infrastructure, investing in our infrastructure, something that would create jobs right away, but also lay a new foundation for our long-term economic strength. The President also talked about education and the need to make sure that the youngest Americans, children, have access to universal pre-kindergarten, that early educational opportunity is a way to ensure that economic opportunity follows and is available to all Americans. And finally, the President talked about the importance of investing in clean energy, not just because of the important impact it would have on our planet, but also because of the important impact it would have on our economy here at home. The President also talked about the need for a balanced approach to dealing with our deficit challenges. This means that we can't just cut our way to prosperity, but rather what we need to do is we need to pursue an approach that would allow us to enjoy some savings from entitlement programs that would actually strengthen those programs over the long term, make some strategic but difficult decisions to make additional cuts to government spending. But in addition to doing those things, we also need to ask those wealthiest Americans, those Americans that are doing the best, to pay a little bit more so that we can share the burden of dealing with our deficit challenges. And finally and importantly, the President talked about political debate in this country. The President acknowledged that it's very important for us to have a vigorous, robust debate in Washington, D.C. There's no disagreement about the fact that we have one. That's good for our democracy. It wouldn't be good if we all just came to Washington, D.C. and everybody sat down in Congress and decided to agree with one another. Instead, it's important for us to have debates. These are tough issues that we're dealing with. But what the President believed was most important is while we have those debates, it's important that we don't allow those debates to serve as an excuse not to capitalize on common ground that exists. That the American people put their leaders here in Washington, D.C., not to just engage in endless debates, but actually to take action. And so we need to identify common ground and take action. That's what the President laid out today, were some ideas where he believed that we should be able to find some common ground in this country, and Democrats and Republicans can work together in the best interest of the country, in the best interest of the middle class, and in the best interest of our economy.
Great. Thank you. And before we get to our first question, let me show everybody, if we can get the cut shot here, everybody watching online, everyone who's joining us here for the White House Social, give yourself a round of applause. Let's get some energy. And also introduce my co-host, my colleague, Caitlin Sabacek. Caitlin, hello.
Hello.
So Caitlin's going to be getting questions from all of you, so be thinking about it. I'll kick the first one off from online, and then just raise your hand, and Caitlin will come grab you, and we'll just go back and forth throughout the evening. So the first one is actually one that I think a lot of people, actually I'd love to hear more about myself, dealing with energy and climate. This Energy Security Trust. Jason, H-Y-E, Jason High, tweeted at us using the hashtag WHChat. What is an Energy Security Trust? What are any more detail on how we're going to get our cars off of oil, and how does that work?
Great. Well, thank you, and thanks, Jason, for your question. Since the very first days of the administration, the President's been focused on an all-of-the-above energy strategy. And one core component of that is how do we reduce the amount of oil that we're using in our transportation fleet. Because of the efforts that he's taken, we are ultimately going to double the efficiency of our cars and trucks out to 54.5 miles per gallon by 2025, something we're really excited about. But we also know that in order to achieve those broader goals and to continue to utilize additional advanced technologies, we need to continue to fund research and development in these areas. So building off of what one of the core themes the President talked about tonight, the notion that we want to build on the best ideas from Democrats and Republicans, a bipartisan concept with the endorsement of many military officials from the SAFE organization was to create this trust fund, knowing that we already develop our oil and gas resources here domestically, but that development also provides a revenue stream. So we're going to take $2 billion of that revenue, set it aside specifically to do ongoing research and development to make sure that our cars and trucks are running more efficiently, that we're electrifying them, that we're using homegrown biofuels, and we're looking at other alternative fuels to further cut dependence on foreign oil and ultimately save consumers money.
Great. Thank you. Caitlin, do you want to pick our first question?
All right, so who's got a question? If you could just say your name and where you're from before you ask a question.
Hi, my name is Kenzie Green, and I'm from Northampton, Massachusetts. I'm the National Communications Director for the College Dems of America, and we all across the country worked really hard to ensure the President's re-election this year. And I want to say hearing a speech like this is just such validation that we really elected the right man for the job. So I want to know, how can we young Americans stay engaged with the administration and ensure that these policy plans become a reality?
I wasn't even paying attention. I'm sorry. I'm like trying to get questions. Josh, you want
Yeah.
to start and we'll get going?
I'll take a crack at it. Certainly participating in a forum like this is one important way that people can get engaged. As Macon said, they'll often use forums like this where people are offering feedback to the president's public activities, to the president's policy proposals, to actually inform the decisions that are being made here at the White House on a daily basis. So using technology like this has been a priority of the president's to make sure that we are capitalizing on that technology, not just to communicate with you about what's actually happening, but also to allow you to communicate with us about how your everyday life is impacted by the decisions that are made here on a daily basis. So, certainly taking advantage of these kinds of opportunities is one important way for you to stay engaged and influence the debate.
Oh, so I assume that whole question was really targeted at me.
That's why I pointed at you.
Yeah, I apologize. I'm not trying to pick questions as we go. I would just say a few other things. First, we approach our job thinking about three different things in the Office of Digital Strategy: how we actually can amplify the president, make sure that his message is getting out to the people that need to hear it, and certainly when we're focusing on certain areas, thinking about ways we can get to the people who are stakeholders in those issues. We figure out how we can create content that's accessible to people who aren't necessarily studying this all the time. We saw a lot of that with the Enhanced State of the Union, and we're always looking for feedback on how that can work. But we're also looking at how we can be a more open administration using technology. The final piece is looking at how we can create opportunities for people to be able to participate. And we've seen a wide range of this over the last 4 years. Everything from our We the People petition site, some of you may be familiar with, through hashtags that are actually really good at drawing the media's attention to a bunch of issues, whether that's efforts to reduce gun violence or avoiding a payroll tax cut or a whole host of different things. It's been really amazing to see how the government and the White House can actually play a convening role in bringing people from very different backgrounds together around issues that they have common ground in, and then actually use social media to direct them in different ways that can have a real impact here in Washington. So that's sort of a big picture answer, hopefully helpful. And I promise I'll pay more attention moving forward, trying to do two things at once.
Macon, if I may, so I work on an issue, immigration reform, that has really, in the last 4 years, as a result of learning from young people who are involved in the immigration movement, the immigration reform movement, learned a lot about how to move this conversation forward. Young people who came here at a young age through no fault of their own, who are often called dreamers, strivers, people that want to, are already a part of the country. The president calls them Americans except in one way, on paper. We learned a lot from the stories that they are able to tell their neighbors, their friends on college campuses, their greater communities. That's really helped advance the issue that I work on and that I've been working on for many, many years. So I would just say that we learn a lot from you all as well, young people, as we think about how to move the debate forward on really tricky, tough issues, just by seeing you all use social media and also seeing you all share your personal stories.
Okay. Wow, a lot of questions. So Caitlin, why don't you line up the next one, and I'll ask one here for Sarah, actually. This is from AAUW Policy on Twitter, who asked, how will the White House ensure bullying and harassment in schools are part of conversations about on gun violence moving forward?
That's a great question, and it's a really important part of the debate. When we went about putting together the president's plan on gun violence, we had lots of cabinet secretaries involved, including the Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, who is extremely committed to that issue. He wanted to make sure, and we talked to school officials around the country, we talked to mental health advocates around the country, we talked to a whole range of people on all aspects of this issue in putting together the plan. And we heard a lot, look, keeping our schools safe is not, it's not about, metal detectors and sort of safety features. It's about, good climates in schools. And so we have proposals in our plan that give resources to schools to help develop there's a lot of evidence-based work that's been done about schools who have tried certain strategies to put in place better climates and targeted the issues that is particularly challenges in their school, be it, different, each school has different challenges, whether it's gangs or drugs or gun or whatever it is, and kind of identifying and focusing on those challenges and having different steps. So what we have put forward a proposal in our budget to increase funding to help all schools do that. So you'll hear a lot more from Secretary Duncan, and Roberta can add to this too, because it's something in education they helped us a lot with at the Domestic Policy Council. But you'll hear a lot more from him as we put together model safe school plans that this is not only about having a response in a moment of a crisis, that's important too, but it's really about changing the culture of schools so that teachers know what to look for, what kind of kids are at risk, kids know themselves what kind of kids are at risk and know what to do. We think we need more mental health presence in the schools, so we just have a whole comprehensive strategy that gets very much to that issue. Very important.
Great. Roberto, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think you've heard what an important component this really is to the strategy that Sarah described. And I'd also would just point out that just 2 years ago, the President and the First Lady hosted here at the White House for the first time ever a summit on bullying prevention. And here in this room, in fact, we gathered with teachers, with parents, with students and young people who had been bullied, with counselors, with mental health workers, with community leaders to talk about this crisis that's really happening in our schools and throughout our community. I think the most important takeaway from that convening and from that day was the sense that we all have a shared responsibility here to make sure that every student in our schools feels safe, is able to feel supported, is able to learn, as Sarah said, in a supportive school culture. And we know that's directly related to their well-being mentally. We also know that that's directly related to their academic well-being and their happiness in school and in their communities. So, this has really been an issue that our administration has weighed in. We have now federal partners in bullying prevention that reaches across our government with the Departments of Health and Human Services and the Department of Education and other partners coming together to really develop a comprehensive response to bullying in our schools and in our communities. And it's a response that's, I think, been led and inspired by the number of stories that we've heard from around the country of young people who have been bullied or who have prevented bullying and encouraged a better climate in their schools and their communities. So it's something we want to continue to be engaged in, and we're going to continue to work toward.
Okay, let's get this. This crowd seems ready to ask a question.
All
Wow.
right.
Okay. Good luck with that, Caitlin.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Jill Carpenter, and my Twitter handles are @PTSDinfo and @JCarpenterClicks. The President spoke a lot about progress that's been made, and there has been a lot of progress made, but there's some areas where progress hasn't been made. And my question relates to how, as a nation, can we become more effective in treating mental illness and suicide prevention? The head of the Massachusetts VA has said that by the time you call our suicide hotline, we have failed.
Yeah.
Currently the primary treatment for depression works less than half the time. And people commit suicide because they lose hope, basically. Walter Reed is about to start a trial where they're going to test some new technology that gets people on the best meds faster and has 2 to 3 times better outcomes than current best practices. How do we get that information out to those people? How do we give people hope that the soldiers who are coming home, that they're going to be well taken care of and that their mental health will be just as important as their physical health?
Great.
Thank you.
So I think there's 2 parts to that. I think the mental health and then perhaps some on focus on the military. But Sarah, if you want to talk a little bit about.
Sure, it's an unbelievably important issue, and I had the honor to serve in the Clinton-Gore White House and participated in 1999 on a White House conference on mental health, and it is unbelievable coming back to it this many years later. Progress has been made in terms of people's awareness, but not as fast as it should be. And it is something that this administration has taken very seriously since day one. One of the most important things, in my view, that we will do for mental health in this country is the Affordable Care Act. It will enhance at least access to treatment, which is obviously, you've highlighted many of the different issues that are at stake here, but certainly offering people coverage. And one of the things that we put out in the gun plan was making sure that the mental health parity regulations go final, that our Affordable Care Act is very clear in what we expect on coverage from our insurance companies, and as well as Medicaid, which is actually the largest provider of mental health in the country. We're very clear to providers. So that was very important. We also had a number of different sort of public health programs that get at some of the issues, proposals that you talked about in terms of more mental health counselors, more awareness in schools, just sort of, there's a promising kind of thing of just, it's sort of a mental health first aid, in that, you don't have to teach every teacher to know exactly, they're not going to be a mental health expert, but you can kind of teach sort of basic, just like we all get taught first aid and sort of basic CPR, like sort of what's basic things to look for and signs and who you're supposed to call and all that kind of stuff. And then one thing I'm very excited about is Secretary Sebelius and Secretary Duncan are going to be launching a mental health dialogue in the coming weeks to really spread awareness, to know what to look for in our in our friends and our communities and our teachers. And we're going to be asking a lot of different private sector commitments. We'd like to involve young people as well, and the online community, and really everybody, because we know 16 to 25-year-olds, that's the most common age when you get a mental health instance arises. It's not a time in life when people are great at finding people to seek treatment. So we need to kind of bridge that gap a little bit, and we're going to try to do that and a whole host of other things. But I appreciate the question. It's an unbelievably important question, and it's something we're super focused on here at the White House.
I'll just add briefly to that. My mom is actually a psychologist, and this is a question that she asks of me quite a bit, so I'm sure she'd be heartened by your answer. I will. I always do. As she can attest, as she's probably watching. But on veterans, the one thing I did wanted to say is that was actually one of the heartening things that I did see during the speech, is one of the moments in which both sides of the room did appear to stand up and applaud the president was when he talked about caring for our veterans when they return home. This is obviously something that's been a big priority of the First Ladies and Dr. Biden's. This is something that is at the top of their agenda. This is also one of the reasons that it's so important what the president has done in terms of ending the war in Iraq and bringing our troops home from Afghanistan. There's no question that repeated deployments have taken a real toll on the best that our country has to offer and their families. And that certainly is another benefit of doing that. And the last thing I'll say is that the president, as you've all have seen, has nominated Senator Hagel to be the next Secretary of Defense. Secretary Hagel, when he's confirmed, will be the first person of enlisted rank to serve as the Secretary of Defense. So this is somebody who served in Vietnam, who has 2 Purple Hearts. He is somebody who firsthand is aware of the strain of serving this country on the battlefield. And I know that the president has already talked to him, and the one thing that they agree on is that caring for our veterans when they return home is a top priority, including making sure they're getting access to the mental health care they may need when they return home.
So I wanted to just give you guys a quick update. I'm checking my email while this is happening, and Twitter, just because I know a lot of you are tweeting as I talk right now, and a lot of you joining us are tweeting. Just some top line stats. We saw 1.1 million hashtag SOTU related tweets tonight. The same time period last year, it was 645,000. So we're seeing a lot more people talking about this. The most tweeted State of the Union moment, middle class opportunity, and the minimum wage. Yeah, and I heard a lot of people react to that when I was in the room here, and it sounds like a lot of people online did. So I want to have a question on that for Brian. The second most tweeted State of the Union moment, a call for a vote on gun legislation. I'm sure that's something Sarah in particular is excited to hear. But we're talking 24,000 tweets a minute on that, which is kind of cool. But there are a lot of questions that we're getting on minimum wage. Let me just give you 2 of them. First comes from Facebook, a guy named Jason Shattuck, who asks, my question would be, if the federal minimum wage is increased to $9 an hour, wouldn't that just make all the other costs go up? That's what happens every time the state minimum wage goes. And then the other question we're actually seeing a few are, has to do with sort of a larger point. why does the president keep talking about the middle class when it's really the lower class that's struggling more? Can you talk a little bit about the elements of the speech that apply to both groups there?
Sure. Obviously, we're very excited about the minimum wage proposal in the speech tonight. For those of you who missed it, or any of you who were in the room who were asleep, the president tonight endorsed raising the federal minimum wage from its current level of $7.25 to $9 by 2015. If we achieve that goal, then we would actually recoup the lost purchasing power that we've seen, because every year the minimum wage stays constant and yet everything else gets more expensive, and it would get back to where it was when President Reagan took office in 1981. We think that's a reasonable goal. It's the right thing to do, and it's also the right thing to do for the economy. And that goes to the first question, which is we often get questions about, don't you have a problem where if you raise the minimum wage, you're actually going to hurt employers? This is a place where we actually have a lot of really good, solid economic evidence and a lot of natural experiments, because we've seen in states, some states have raised the minimum wage and others haven't, and you can assess what happens. And that overwhelming body of evidence suggests that actually modest increases in the minimum wage are economic winners. And the principal reason is because for businesses, if you are paying your workers a little bit more, you often save money in training costs because you have less churn in your workforce. You get more consumers because the people who are in your community actually have more money in their pocket to go out and spend. And one of the heartening things is this is why it's these economic realities that are driving an increasing number of businesses to actually come out and support reasonable increases in the minimum wage as well. And I would note that since we at the federal level last increased the minimum wage to $7.25 in 2007, or the last increase went into effect in 2007, 19 states have on their own went and increased the minimum wage as well. So this is one of those places where we have an opportunity to do right by tens of millions of people who are out there working hard every day, and also do something that could be good for the economy as well. And I think that goes to the second question, which is, how do we put in place policies that actually give everybody a reasonable shot to make it into the middle class if they're willing to work hard and be responsible? And the minimum wage is part of that, because the truth is right now that if you work full-time at the minimum wage and you have children, then you are raising your children in poverty. And anybody who is willing to go out and work hard every single day, in this country, should have the opportunity to not have to raise their kids in poverty. And this is, so this is an issue of economic security, but it's also an issue of economic opportunity. Obviously, a lot of the answer is about individual responsibility. It's about free enterprise and individual determination. The president spoke to that tonight. But it's also about putting in place the tools that for people who are responsible and who are willing to take responsibility, that they actually have a shot. So we're really excited about this. This is something we're going to be talking about. The president's going to be talking about more. And this is one of these places where I would, encourage to the other question that we got about staying engaged. This is a place where a lot of the support actually comes from the American people and from businesses and communities, because inside Washington, there's a whole debate about the minimum wage, but outside Washington, hearing people's stories about what minimum wage actually means to people and increases mean to people, I think is going to be a very important part of this debate.
Great, thanks. I'm going to take it back to Caitlin here, but before she does, I just want to remind those of you watching, we're taking questions from hashtag WHChat on Twitter, Facebook, Google+, and there's a tool at whitehouse.gov/SOTU where you can choose a line from the speech that spoke to you, tell the president why, and then share that line with your friends. So it's a new feature at whitehouse.gov. We hope you'll go check it out. Caitlin, lots of hands. Good luck.
All right, so we're going to take a question from this side of the room this time.
Hello, my name is Tyler Sidonis. I'm a student at American University here in Washington, D.C., and thank you for the opportunity to attend this today. I spent the summer working at an organization in Seattle called the Washington Bus, and we spent 10 weeks registering thousands of young people to vote in preparation for the marriage equality campaign and other issues taking place out there. And during my experience, I saw firsthand a lot of young people who wanted to participate in the political process but weren't able to because of things like missing a deadline, or I know in a lot of other states a big issue is voter ID laws. So I was very happy to see the president mention today that he is proposing a nonpartisan commission to make the voting experience a little bit easier. And I'm wondering if anyone on the panel could address that commission, specifically what timeline might be in place for it, who will be participating in it, and what kind of proposals the president hopes to get out of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. It's a good one, and it's something that the president early on in his career in politics actually organized a voter registration drive himself during the, I believe it was the Clinton campaign in 1996, that he was very instrumental in trying to register voters. So this is something that he doesn't just care about because he has spent a lot of time asking for votes the last few years, but also because he's actually spent a lot of time trying to organize efforts to encourage people to register, get involved in the process, and actually cast a vote. The proposal that the president laid out tonight, I think, is the very beginning of that process, would be the best way to describe it to you. The commission that he wants to, where he wants to start, is to actually have his own campaign lawyer, a guy named Bob Bauer, actually work with Mitt Romney's campaign lawyer, a guy named Ben Ginsberg. These are two very well-known, high-powered Washington, D.C. lawyers who have a ton of experience with election law. And hopefully this will be an opportunity for us to, as I sort of referenced, to find some common ground on this issue. I think that everybody can, most Americans, particularly people who are involved in the electoral process, would acknowledge that the right to vote is in some ways as important as any of the other rights that we exercise in this country. And ensuring that people have the opportunity to exercise that right, it should be a critical part of our democracy. And so you have raised and identified a number of the problems that sometimes can interfere with people's ability to exercise that vote. So I don't know, the president didn't lay out any deadlines today, but this is something that the president cares about, and I think it's something that you'll, in the weeks and months ahead, you can expect the president to keep talking about it. I don't think this is the kind of issue that we're gonna, next month we're gonna lay out a report and it's gonna solve all the problems. But I do think that this is the beginning of a process that we need to take seriously to ensure that one of the most sacred rights that we enjoy in this country is protected for everybody.
Great. Caitlin, why don't you take one more question from the audience here, since they're being so patient.
All right, so we got another question here from the back.
My name is Mikhail Bell. I am from Waterford, New York originally, now live in Arlington, graduate student at George Mason University. My question pertains to human trafficking. One of the themes I noticed tonight, the president was talking about issues that are kind of cross-cutting and touch many other things like cybersecurity. Human trafficking is one of those things as well. Could you talk a bit more about what the White House is doing? The Senate passed the anti-trafficking bill, which has languished for a bit. Earlier today, President Obama had a great speech that he gave at the Clinton Global Initiative late last year as well. So if you could flesh that out a bit more.
Great.
Sure, I'm happy to address that question a little bit. As you mentioned, the president earlier this year was at the Clinton Global Initiative, gave a speech that laid out a number of different actions that we're taking to address the issue of trafficking, both from the law enforcement training side of this to identify individuals that are engaging in trafficking and prosecuting those individuals. But we're also very concerned and interested in making sure that we're giving individuals who are victimized by different types of trafficking, human trafficking, labor, sex trafficking, the ability to come forward, rehabilitate themselves, get access to training so that they can become productive members of their society and of their communities. It's something that people, as we think about mental health issues, individuals that suffer from trafficking or victims of trafficking need a lot of support services so that they can really fully recover from the victimization. So that's something that the president in his speech earlier this year talked a lot about, all of those measures that are happening, all those things that we're thinking about. Me, myself, I'm involved in some of the work that we're doing around victim services. So, we need to, a lot of individuals are actually foreign-born individuals that suffer from trafficking. So there are immigration tools that we can put in place to let those individuals come out of the shadows, get something called a T or a U visa if they're able to cooperate with law enforcement and investigation and fully integrate into their communities. There's also a federal action plan that we are developing right now across the administration collaboration with, anywhere from the Department of Education, Department of Labor, Health and Human Services, Department of Homeland Security, and others, to think through a federal strategic action plan that we can put in place to serve victims better and to better learn from the examples of what states and localities are doing. There's some really great work going on all over the country, whether it's Los Angeles, Houston, New York, Miami, models that we think we can replicate in other communities where there are a number of trafficking victims, and we want to both prosecute those folks that are engaging in this type of activity, but we also want to serve the victims who are victimized by those individuals. And I would also just say, with respect to our immigration reform agenda that the president laid out just a few days ago in Las Vegas, there are also a number of different measures that we want to put in place to give federal prosecutors more tools to go after people who are engaging in human smuggling and trafficking, and also victimizing immigrants.
Okay, thank you. Let's take one more question from Facebook. We'll take one from out here in a second. I know it's it's intimidating me up here. So Roberta, this one's for you. It comes from Michelle Fitz. Also, why universal pre-K? Seems to me it gets harder much further down the line. How about free college for taxpayers at state schools and community colleges? How about the last 2 years of high school being vocationally or college prep based? So can you put tonight's policy in that context?
Well, thanks, Michelle, for the question. Certainly, greater college access and a retooling of our high school experience is also needed too. But let me start with the question at hand, which is the big proposal that the president laid out of providing a new federal-state partnership that would provide access to preschool for all students. The president's message tonight was really about a strong middle class. And it's the goal of the policies that he laid out in this speech, but a strong middle class is also the engine really to drive our American economy forward and to drive individual opportunity to achieve the American dream. And for so many of our families, that access to the middle class really begins with a solid and strong education. So the president really began tonight by talking about the importance of early childhood education and learning at birth. We have a whole host of science that shows that the experiences that our youngest children have access to are so important for their learning and for their development and for their later success in schools. So the question is, knowing what we know about that a great preschool experience, that a great experience at age 2, at age 3 can make all the difference to making sure that a student can master high standards in reading and math later in school, makes all the difference in terms of their chance to be able to graduate from high school and continue on to college and live a successful life and really grow a thriving family. Knowing what we know, we can't afford as a country to not provide this type of opportunity for each of our students. And yet, as you heard the president say tonight, only fewer than 3 out of every 10 children, preschool-aged children, have access to the type of high-quality program that they need to be able to reap that benefit. So this is a new federal-state partnership that he's calling for. It builds on some of the momentum that we've seen in the states. We have quite a few states that have started to move forward on pre-K, but aren't yet at a place where they're providing universal access for students and for children at a high rate of quality. So that's really the challenge. But that commitment's got to continue even beyond early childhood education. This is why the president over the past 4 years has focused on doing more to make sure that we're raising expectations across our education system, raising standards in our schools, making sure there's an effective teacher in front of every classroom, doing the hard work of turning around some of our low-performing schools. And tonight he talked about redesigning some of our high schools, which, Michelle, you allude in your comment to the importance of making sure that those experiences in high school are really turning students on to learning, right? They're motivating students, they're engaging students, they're helping them actively prepare for a college and for a successful career. High school has to be a place where our students are learning and they're getting the skills they'll need to be able to be successful in jobs. And he's also doing more to make sure that our families have the information and the access that they need to our higher education system. Again, because higher education today and a college degree to get today is a prerequisite to get ahead. It's not just a pathway for some. In the jobs moving forward, it really is a prerequisite for all. So we're trying to do more to make sure families have the information they need to navigate that system, to find that value and that affordable option for higher education. And we're also going to do our part as a federal government to provide the grant aid and the loans that are reliable and efficient for our students to be able to get ahead and earn that degree.
Okay, great, thank you. We're going to take some more questions from in here. We're going to try to take a couple, so please keep your questions brief, and we'll try to keep our answers focused and brief as well, but thorough. So go ahead.
All right, so here's another question.
Finally. Hi, my name is Elian Ramos. I'm from Latinos in Social Media, Latism. And my question has to do with immigration. There was a lot of talk during the whole speech tonight about border reinforcement and about language requirements. But what does that mean? What does that language mean for somebody who's being separated from their family? Like, what are the actual terms that somebody who is in that situation must keep in mind when it comes to the president's proposal?
Okay, thank you.
So great, I'm happy to take that question and love the work that Latism does all over the country to promote all these issues that matter to the Latino community. So in terms of what the president would like to see done to fix our broken immigration system, there are 4 main parts that he would like to see accomplished in an immigration reform package. One is to continue to secure our borders. We know that that's something that he has taken an oath to do, and he will continue to take very seriously. So there's work that we need to do to continue to give our law enforcement the tools that they need to secure the borders. There's also things that we need to do at our ports of entry, which is where a lot of our travel and tourism and trade comes into the country. So when we talk about securing our borders, it's in between those ports of entry, but it's also at the ports of entry, so we can, that helps our economy, but that also helps our security. So another big piece is cracking down on employers that are exploiting both undocumented workers, but also undermining American workers by hiring undocumented workers, paying them under the books, sometimes paying them low wages, abusing them, things like that. So the main piece of that part of our component of immigration reform is making turning the way we verify whether people work are authorized to work in our country, turning that into an electronic system. There is a program called E-Verify that we've been that is a voluntary system right now, and we're going to make that mandatory. It's going to be phased in over 5 years, so it will give employers the opportunity to really understand what that means. It'll be phased in, and also be thinking about small businesses kind of at the tail end of that program being phased in over time, so that they can get the tools that they need to be equipped to best use it. But we really think that we need to turn to an electronic-based system, not a 19th, 20th century paper-based verification system. A big component of the president's proposal is also creating a pathway to earn citizenship for the 11 million undocumented people in our country right now. So he talked about that a lot in Las Vegas just a few days ago, and what he means by that is creating a real path for folks. No gimmicks around creating a path, but as long as people can demonstrate that they were in the country, that they're attempting to pay their taxes, that they want to learn English, that they haven't broken any other criminal laws, that they will be able to earn their path to citizenship. They'll have a temporary provisional status for a period of time, and then eventually be able to earn their green card once they get in the back of the line behind people who are waiting outside the country to come in here legally. They'll be able to get their green card, and then eventually citizenship. Under our current laws, you have to wait 5 years before you can become a citizen, so we would do that. And then the fourth big piece of immigration reform is streamlining the legal immigration system, so we can reunite families more quickly. Families wait sometimes because of outdated per country and annual caps, can wait years and years to reunite with their family members. So we care about fixing fixing the broken immigration system for families, also for employers and for individuals that want to contribute to our economy. So young people who are studying in our colleges and universities from outside the country, who want to stay here, create jobs, create businesses. We want to create a number of different reforms to the system that will address the legal immigration system as well.
Okay, Caitlin?
All right, let's get another question from this side of the room.
My name is Jacob Breach. I'm actually from Indiana, but I work here in Washington, D.C. for the Department of Defense. My question wasn't really touched upon in the president's speech. It has to deal with cybersecurity a little bit. I understand that our own forces like Cybercom can't even fill the ranks that they need to protect this country, but pardon me, but yet we still have an issue with arresting some of these people like Aaron Swartz, who, killed himself the other day because of our outdated legal system. How can we reform our legal system in order to, recruit some of these people to work on our side rather than work against the system?
Well, yeah, I can. I'm certainly not an expert in this by any means, but the president did talk tonight about his intention to sign an executive order about cybersecurity. This is something that they have been debating in Congress for quite some time now, is trying to find some bipartisan ground around a very complicated policy issue, which is trying to figure out an appropriate way to respect the privacy of private enterprise, while at the same time making sure that that the government has the resources and the information it needs to protect the country from cyber attacks. And there have been some high-profile incidents lately of private businesses and also certain government agencies being subjected to some pretty serious cyber attacks from other countries. So this is something that that the president will be talking about a little bit more. His executive order to act unilaterally to try to impose some order and some rules to codify a mode of dealing with these challenges is not at all a substitute for congressional action. That what Congress could do is take more far-reaching action to make sure that we have the kinds of rules in place to protect the country and our infrastructure from cyber attack. This is, as you could tell from the way that the president talked about in the speech, this is a priority of his, certainly because of the impact it could have on our economy, but also because of the impact it could have on our national security. And I do anticipate that this is something that, while I'd be surprised if the word cybersecurity had been mentioned in any previous State of the Union address, I would venture to guess that every future State of the Union address from here on out will be talking about this issue.
Great. Caitlin, maybe one more?
Backyard.
Hi, I'm Amisha Sampat with Immigration Equality. One of the notable differences between the immigration plans released by the President and the Senate was the inclusion of LGBT families. Does the President plan to actively engage Congress throughout the legislative process in order to ensure those families' inclusion? Thanks.
Great, thank you for your question and for all your advocacy on this issue over the years. This is something that is, as you point out, different than what was in the Senate bipartisan principles in our framework, something the President believes in very strongly, that same-sex families should be treated the same way that other families are treated in our immigration law system. So, we are already engaging pretty actively with members of Congress in both the House and Senate on all of the issues that he cares about in the immigration reform package. So we will definitely be engaging on this issue. Secretary Napolitano will be testifying tomorrow in the Senate Judiciary Committee at a hearing, the first hearing in the Senate on immigration reform. So, I expect that this question will come up, and she will also reiterate the President's support for these policies.
Great. Okay. Dees, I've got, sorry, Brian. Sorry, formal. Brian, I've got a question from you from the web that deals a little bit more economic issues from Gloria, who touched on something the President talked about at the beginning of the speech. How are you going to protect Social Security and Medicare in the face of a lot of the fiscal debates that are happening, and certainly with a lot of the long-term deficit issues that he described tonight?
It's a good question. I know it's on a lot of people's minds, and part of the reason why the President spent a decent amount of time at the front end of the speech talking about deficit reduction was that while he made very clear that deficit reduction alone is not an economic strategy, and we have to have a theory of how we grow the economy and help create good middle-class jobs, all of the investments from education to energy to reducing gun violence, all of the priorities that we all think are important in that effort aren't going to be possible if we don't have a serious, credible plan to get our nation's finances in order. And so that's really important. And I think what you heard from the president tonight was a couple of pretty core principles. One, he is committed to finishing the task on deficit reduction. It's easy to lose sight of the fact because it seems like there is a constant crisis in Washington over these fiscal issues. It's easy to lose sight of the fact that we have made real progress. This president has signed into law $2.5 trillion in deficit reduction in just the last couple of years. Democrats and Republicans voted together to bring all of that deficit reduction to the president's desk. So that is real progress. The president is committed to finishing that task. That's number one. Number two, he believes, as strongly as I think he believes anything, that has to be done in a balanced way. And the reason for that goes exactly to the premise of the question, which is balance means looking hard at programs where we cut where we can and reform where we can, but couple that with tax reforms that can bring in additional revenue by reforming our tax code and getting rid of inefficient tax expenditures, closing loopholes that aren't doing any benefit for the economy right now. If you do that together, then there is a reasonable and responsible way to achieve those deficit reduction goals. That will require some additional reforms to Medicare, and the president talked about that tonight. There are ways to strengthen the program and help reduce health care costs going forward without putting at risk the fundamental guarantee that Medicare provides to our seniors. We can do that, and we should do that. The problem is if you don't take a balanced approach and you try to do this all on the spending side, then you're forced to make really difficult and economically unwise decisions to cut into things like Social Security benefits, to decimate things like our clean energy investments, our basic research that help drive innovation in the economy. And, you know, the president asked some pretty straightforward questions tonight about why would we do that as a country, and how can we go out and ask middle-class Americans or seniors who have worked all their lives to suffer those cuts if we're not asking anything of our tax code, if we're not looking at any of these loopholes or any of these inefficient tax expenditures. So I think the short answer to that question is there is a reasonable approach to deficit reduction that allows us to make these investments that we've all talked about tonight by coupling additional reforms in spending with additional revenue from tax reform. And that's the plan that the president has had on the table. And what should give you some optimism, even though we do feel like we're in constant crisis in Washington on this issue, is that that is the approach that the majority of Americans believe is the right way to go. And I think increasingly there's an understanding that if we're going to get this done, that's going to have to be the path that we take.
Okay, great. I know we're getting a little bit late, so why don't we hand it back to Caitlin, take a few more from in here.
All right, so let's take one from back over here.
Hi, my name is Rajiv. I'm from California. Traveled a little ways to get here, but I'm glad I got a question in. So, the president outlined a number of areas in which we could have bipartisan agreement, and bipartisanship sort of seems to range on the side of merit tolerance, where one party barely finds itself able to swallow principles from the other party, you know, fundamentally alarming to their own interest, to a kind of empathy where one party is able to espouse the other party's views as their own. I was wondering for each of the folks here, on your own issues, where you're able to define a success for bipartisanship or bipartisan agreement, given the constraints of stalwarts or you know, a pressing time to get things done, and folks needing, like, you know, solutions on and off the Hill.
Okay. That's so we'll do it. I guess that's like a lightning round. I mean, Josh could talk about the press office and find it.
Yeah. We have some vigorous debates there too with the press.
I mean, I would just say very quickly from my perspective, I feel like I'm in many ways one of the easiest areas because the sort of use of technology and social media and really figuring out how we can develop tools to engage the public is something that has wide interest across both parties and nonpartisan players, and in fact is changing these debates from being a black and white to a very multifaceted spectrum of voices, and that's a really good thing. I've had a lot of good conversations with people in the House who are Republicans who are doing a really interesting work. There's a guy named Matt Lira who's really forward-thinking, a guy who's praised our stuff and whose stuff I praise as well. And that's been really fun to work on. And I think we're seeing a sort of undeniable trend of using these tools more and more. I like to think we use them pretty well and sort of set a standard for other people to look at. But I also have learned quite a bit from how members of Congress and members of the Senate, or rather members of the House and members of the Senate on both parties are using these tools. So that's an area that we work together a lot on.
Let me just say one thing before we get to this policy people, and this was one point that the president tried to make in his speech, which is certainly if you just watch cable television or if you just pick up the newspaper, you may be left with the impression that all you have is a bunch of people who disagree with each other on everything. And one of the things that the president tried to emphasize in the speech is, again, it's healthy for us to have a robust debate in this democracy, but what's not healthy is if we allow those debates to go on and on and on, and if we allow those debates to obscure the common ground that exists. The president's plea today, or this evening in the speech, was to engage in those debates. It's healthy for our democracy, but take action where there's common ground. And I think that each of the folks who are up here can cite specific examples of where there may be differences of opinion about certain aspects of the policy, but there is common ground to be seized. And by seizing on that common ground, we can actually make progress that's in the best interest of the country. So, Sarah, you actually probably are the best example of this, so why don't you?
Excellent. Well, I think that, as the president mentioned tonight, and I think you saw, that the gun violence area this time really, is different. And the vice president talks a lot about this as somebody who has been in this town for some time, that he hasn't really seen the nation respond so emotionally to an issue. And I think you saw a lot of that emotion in the hall tonight on gun violence. We don't know yet what that will mean ultimately for legislative outcome. We have a lot of encouraging signs. We have Republicans who are interested. Senator Coburn is looking at ideas on universal background checks, starting to work with people. But this is an area where we know that the landscape has shifted, but we don't know yet exactly what it means. Our job is to push as much as we can, given the momentum, and that's, we hope, your job and the job of all Americans too, in terms of what people can do. This is really an issue where we need, the emotion and to really translate into action, and for people to hear, members to hear, and I think. If we continue the momentum, I think we really can get bipartisanship on this issue, and maybe not in every policy area. We're going to work as hard as we can, but certainly to take some really important steps. So I think tonight was really encouraging in that regard. The number of people in the hall, number of gun victims, and et cetera, and it's momentum that we want to build upon. We're reaching out to everybody, to hunters and environmentalists and anyone, young people, anyone we can think of to push the momentum, and that's our job.
Okay.
So I'll be really quick. You use the word empathy, and I like that because I think one of the most important things for people who work on policy is the ability to be able to put yourself in the position of the people you're trying to help. And there's no, but people from both parties can do that. And just to give you one just common sense example the president talked about that I spent a lot of time on, refinancing your home has nothing to do with your political party. And I can promise you that Democrat, Republican, Independent, it doesn't matter. If you sit around and you own your home and you're stuck in a 7% interest rate, politics has nothing to do with it. It has to do with, can you lower your monthly payments by a couple $100s? That is the kind of pocketbook thing that could totally change the economic trajectory of a family. And so I know Sarah likes refinancing because she's always refinancing her home. You know, but
Anything I can do to help,
but
your
it's
policy.
you know, but this is one of those places where we have actually been able to have a constructive conversation. You know, one of the biggest proponents of refinancing was Mitt Romney's chief economic advisor during the campaign, and you know, I think that there are lots of these places where you can just try to take partisanship out of it altogether. It always gets complicated when you have to deal with U.S. Congress. And so, you know, we just have to be realistic about that. But I think that a lot of these policy issues, when you get down to sort of what do they mean for a typical person, a typical family, there's no politics about it. It's about, is there an actual way to help people in a way that's responsible? And so I think if you start there, you can often make a lot more progress.
Okay?
I'll just say
really quick.
really
They're
quick.
getting a lot of like evil eyes.
Yeah. So, I mean,
Yeah.
every major immigration reforms since the 1960s has only been enacted through bipartisanship. So, I mean, on my issue, there's a lot of really promising energy on both sides of the aisle in both chambers, as the president referenced today, that I think will get us to where we need to. So, I mean, from my perspective, I'm more hopeful than I've been in about 7 or 8 years on this issue in terms of whether we can get it done because of the bipartisanship. Now, why that's happening, you know, elections matter, right? And I think that is driving some from the other side of the aisle to rethink this issue a bit, which is fine, right? I mean, so, you know, I think that people voicing their opinion, talking about why this is important to get done, not because you're a Democrat or a Republican, but because it's the right thing for our country, is really important. So I mean, we're very hopeful that this will be an example of us being able to get something done in a really major way to totally overhaul and change the system for the better.
So for energy and climate policy, it's true that these are a tad bit divisive policy matters in Washington these days. But I do think that there was a really important action taken by Congress and something that certainly the president invested heavily in. That was the the continuation of the production tax credit. Not a lot of people actually know that Democrats and Republicans came together at the end of the year and did something pretty historic for the wind industry. And a few months ago, I was getting phone calls because the tax credit was going to expire. That meant that literally thousands of people were losing their jobs in the wind sector because there was no certainty and predictability from Congress. The president pushed this issue hard. He had a great team working with him. We engaged Congress, and Democrats and Republicans were working together to make sure that this tax credit got extended. Now I get phone calls and emails every day from people that are going back to work, building wind turbines, creating clean energy, and doing that in an affordable way for American consumers. So, you know, there are many opportunities to find those win-wins when we're thinking about energy policy, energy efficiency. Another area the president mentioned tonight is obviously another key opportunity. Electrification and reducing dependence on foreign oil. So I am optimistic that that we have some successes under our belt, and we're certainly going to be focused on how we can improve and grow upon those.
You know, and in the area of education, you know, I think education is another one of these domestic areas that has a history of old, somewhat stale, ideologically bent debates. You know, when the president first came into the White House, he really tried to set these ideologies aside and plow through with an approach that really put students first. And I think when you get to these moments of crafting great bipartisan agreement on policy or great bipartisan pieces of legislation here in Washington, it's a moment where both sides are able to kind of put aside old ideologies with a greater cause and a greater good in mind. In the case of education, it's really our children and the future and the need for change in our system for our kids. So really the best example of that for us has been the Race to the Top. And this is a program now that's reaching across 19 states that are governed by Republicans as well as Democrats, that are really working to try to retool and reshape their education system to focus on new higher standards and on the opportunity and new goal for all students to be able to graduate from high school, college, and career ready. And we have governors on both sides of the aisle that are some of the strongest supporters for this new vision for education reform.
Yeah. Okay, so Caitlin, let's take another one. But while you're finding someone, good luck with that. It's actually really invigorating to hear these answers. That's a great question, because whether it's Race to the Top, wind energy, clean energy generally, immigration reform, programs like refinance, or efforts to reduce gun violence, there are very concrete examples of bipartisan interest in moving this forward. So don't succumb to cynicism. We can get some of this stuff done. Caitlin?
All right, so we're going to take one from the middle of the room this time. So in the blue shirt.
Thank you. My name is Parla from Virginia, and my question is for Ms. Escobar about immigration reform. Taking into consideration that we have a backlog on our immigration processing right now, if we pass the immigration reform, how are you going to cope up with the 11 million to the back of the line? Do you have a system in place to cope with the demand? And do you have any resources?
Sure. So I'm happy to take that question. So as I was talking about earlier, there's an important piece of immigration reform, streamlining the legal immigration system. Part of the reason why we have a backlog is not because our government agencies aren't willing and able to process immigration applications. It has more to do with the caps that are in place that are in the law that tells the State Department or DHS, you cannot process any more applications in China or Mexico or the Philippines. So what we want to do is change the system so we do have the more flexibility. We need to increase the number of visas that are allowed into the system so that we can, over time, clear the backlog before the 11 million get in line to have access to the green card system. So we feel pretty confident, that we'll work across the interagency on issue of immigration. You always have to work across different agencies to make sure the system works right. And so we feel pretty confident in the relationships that the State Department, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Labor, the Department of Justice have in place right now, that they'll be able to, once we pass the reform effort, to clear those backlogs in an efficient way.
Right. So we're going to take two more questions, actually. So Caitlin, why don't you find someone here? I'll take one more from online. I know it's getting late in the hour and people need to go. Heather, I've got one for you, actually, on energy and climate change, which I think really gets at a common reaction that we've seen online. This one's from A. Siegel, who said, liked emphasis on climate change, but how does increased oil production help solve it? So we have this short-term, long-term strategy. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between those two things?
Certainly. The president's been very clear from the very beginning. In the near term, we're going to have to continue to rely on safe and responsible domestic and oil and gas production. And we're going to have to do that in the near term as we are transitioning to a clean energy economy. There is no president that has taken more aggressive steps to back oil out of our economy. And we've done that by increasing the efficiency of our cars and trucks, by investing heavily in biofuels. We now have advanced biofuels that we never even could dream of even a decade ago coming into the system and coming online, and at the same time reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And the last thing, the last core component of this is that we're seeing and realizing additional opportunities to transition the fleets that we have today to natural gas vehicles. I mean, the reference to being able to drive coast to coast without a single drop of oil is certainly something that resonates, I think, with this administration and further underscores why we've made investment in ongoing research and development in batteries and electrification of the fleet such a top priority. And all of this is done through the lens of what is the best long-term policy? What are those levers that we can use that are certainly we have to develop oil and gas today responsibly. This administration has put more aggressive environmental and labor standards on that development, both on and offshore. But what are the key levers that we can use to transition away from oil? Ultimately, we all know that's good for energy security, that's good for national security, and certainly good for consumers' bottom line.
Great, thank you. So we're going to take one more question from the audience. I'll hang around a little bit for those of you that want to talk about sort of what we did tonight and have questions about that. But I know it's getting late and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So last question.
Thank you. My name is Rachel Weiss. I'm a student at the George Washington University and an intern at the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. And my question has to do with marriage equality. President Obama has announced his public support of marriage equality and is pursuing initiatives to ensure equal treatment and equal benefits for all military families. I was wondering if you could expand upon this initiative as well as other initiatives that he is pursuing to fight for marriage equality. Thank you.
Rachel, thank you for your question. This is one of the things that's so interesting about this issue is how quickly it's changed. Just in the last, certainly in the last decade, but even in a shorter period of time, as recently as 6 or 8 years ago, this is something that politicians in neither party were willing to discuss. And now, we're seeing obviously a lot of Democrats and even some Republicans, to refer to a previous question, talk about this issue as an issue of basic fairness. There are a lot of ways in which this policy and dealing with this issue of equality affects a lot of other policies. You've heard Felicia talk about it in terms of immigration policy. It certainly that affects some policies that are made at the Department of Defense as it relates to the treatment of spouses of our men and women who are serving in uniform. These are all efforts on the president's part and on the part of the administration to try to infuse this principle of fairness into a lot of the policy making that we're engaged in on a regular basis. The other place where we're seeing some movement on this issue is actually in the courts. And certainly the Supreme Court has a couple of important decisions to make on these issues. The administration, in at least one situation in terms of the Defense of Marriage Act, has taken a pretty clear position about what the administration's views are legally and how that is translated into a legal context in a way that also happens to reflect the president's own personal orientation on these views. So, my guess is, in terms of future movements on this that will be high profile, it'll actually be in the courts. And I think that will be something that will be closely watched, as I mentioned, certainly in the midst of this Supreme Court session. So thank you for your question. It's an excellent one.
All right. So everyone, thank you for tuning in. I got an email just a minute ago that we still have around 60,000 people watching. It is 11:30 at night. And 8:30 on the West Coast. But thank you so much, and have a great night. Thank you to everyone who came to join us in person. And we will see you again next year.